The Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi have signed vital agreements aimed at strengthening their commercial ties. The presidents of both countries signed the agreements in Kinshasa earlier this week. The leaders stressed the necessity of several beneficial projects, such as bridges for vehicles and pedestrians on the Ruzizi River, agricultural work in the Ruzizi Plain, as well as rehabilitation and electrification of the Bujumbura, Uvira, Bukavu-Goma Road and the development of the Gitega-Uvira-Kindu Standard Gauge Railway. The agreements also included cooperation on development maintenance and strengthening of peace, defense and security, trade facilitation and political and diplomatic consultations. But Burundi and the DRC are not the only ones to formalize trade agreements this week. Zimbabwe and Malawi have resumed talks to revise their bilateral agreement from the early 1990s. The aim is to bring in modern-day investments and assist in addressing the pressing development needs of the two countries. Malawi and Zimbabwe had earlier signed a bilateral trade agreement in 1995, which allowed duty-free imports on a reciprocal basis. Now, goods involved in this deal needed to meet 25% minimum domestic content provisions and conform to each other's standards. The two countries are both members of COMESA and SADC, which means that traders from both states can export or import goods duty-free and quota-free from each other. Our focus today is on these recent agreements and how they can benefit the countries. This is Business Edge. Welcome. Joining me is New Central researcher Abdulateef Ahmed, and we're going to get into these issues with him right here. Abdulateef, welcome once again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get straight into it. I think one of the first things we'll have to ask is, what are the reasons we typically see countries going into bilateral agreements with their neighbors? This happens with neighbors, it happens with people across the pond, it happens with people across the continent. But why do we see countries typically going into bilateral agreements?
Generally speaking, bilateral agreements are entered by countries because they have identified areas of mutual interest, and therefore they are looking to combine their resources and their energies as against when you have to be involved in multilateral agreements that will involve 3 or more countries. It is a lot easier to enter bilateral agreements between 2 countries. However, it is meant to improve trade, investment, and ease of doing business between both countries. Generally speaking, it will boost job and employment between the countries involved.
So one of the things that's highlighted particularly for Burundi and the DRC is building of bridges that will allow pedestrians and cars to move around, particularly a bridge over the Ruzizi River. What impact do you think this bridge is going to have on trade between the DRC and Burundi?
Okay, generally there has been trade and movement of people between Burundi and the DRC. However, the Ruzizi Plain is the only terrestrial contact between the two countries. Therefore, a bridge over the two countries, between the two countries, is meant to improve trade, make it the time between movement between both countries to be shorter as compared to the alternative routes that existed before now. Also, the fact that this bridge has been built, there can be improved security between both countries along the paths that help commuters and traders to move their goods or services, as the case may be.
Okay, another one of the projects that was highlighted is the electrification of the Bujumbura, Uvira, Bukavu-Goma Road, which is also part of the intended projects. But these areas also happen to be known insecurity hotspots. There's a lot happening around these particular areas in Central Africa. Can improved commercial potential, do you think that improving the commercial potential in these areas can also help ease the conflict in these areas?
Readily, once you are able to inject more power into the grid and you're connecting to countries and improving electric supply, what it means is that business will be enhanced, and therefore those who ordinarily will have all the time to be involved in crimes and violence will see the need to be more involved in trade, businesses, and all of that. So there's a chance that the electrification in this axis will reduce insecurity, as the case may be, and improve trade and investment between both countries.
For the agreement between Burundi and the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, we're seeing that it also emphasizes trade facilitation. What is expected to happen in this regard? Are we expecting to see bilateral commissions, joint commissions being set up for the specific aim of making sure that trade between the two countries is increased? What do we expect from that?
These two countries have a long history of partnership, and these agreements are meant to improve and boost these partnerships, as the case may be. What we are looking at is the fact that there will be improved tariff regime between both countries, and the ease of movement will be enhanced. And again, the bottlenecks that were involved in between the use of currencies and other trade hiccups would be seen to reduce as the agreements kick off.
So let's look at the benefits for both of the countries. What are the benefits you think each country is going to get from this agreement, Burundi and the DRC?
Both countries stand a better chance to have better policing and better security between them. Don't forget that when the DRC was hit by Ebola crisis some time ago, there was a lot of tension, in Burundi, because a lot of people were moving into Burundi, and therefore these agreements, which are business agreements, will also be a reason for better cooperation in terms of securing the borders, securing movement, and ensuring that health tourism between both countries are improved, because a lot of DRC residents believe that there's better health facility and improved medical services in Burundi.
All right, we'll take a break here. And as I said earlier, Burundi and the DRC are not the only countries this week to formalize more trade agreements between them. When we come back, we'll look at what's happening with Malawi and Zimbabwe, who have revised a deal that was signed in 1995. This is Business Edge. Do stay with us. You're still watching Business Edge on News Central. My guest is Abdulateef Ahmed, researcher here at News Central. So now let's look at Zimbabwe and Malawi, Abdulateef. Their bilateral trade agreement dates back to 1995. And before we get into what they revised, why do you think it took so long for that deal to literally be brought up to speed, to be brought to the modern age in order to see what the best that Zimbabwe and Malawi can get out of each other is?
Okay, for a long while now, the trade between Zimbabwe and Malawi has been impacted largely because Malawi has experienced a lot of trade deficits because its industrial sector is poorly evolved. Its financial sector is problematic because of its heavy borrowing and other fiscal policies of government that has affected the volume of trade between itself and its immediate neighbors. Zimbabwe is one of its favorite trading partners, and even at that, there hasn't been a remarkable rate of business and entrepreneurial engagements between both countries. And therefore, there was need to bring up the agreements entered in 1995 to speed, because in that agreement contains a lot that is positive for both countries. Most areas of interest have been identified and entered into that agreement.
So now, with Zimbabwe and Malawi revising that agreement, we also know both of them are logistics links in the larger transport system of Southern Africa. And we've seen some movement in recent time as well as the commissioning of that, I guess we'd say very historic bridge too. But did you see this revised agreement having any impact on the existing structures or impacting how the transport system works in the Southern Africa region?
Hopefully it will. Don't forget that most of the imports, Malawi imports are about 45 to 50% of imports into Malawi come from from South Africa. And what it means is that it passes through Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe can therefore come in between this logistic arrangement and improve the transportation between the two countries, being the intermediary between South Africa and Malawi. There's a chance that there will be improvement in the logistics chain.
Let's look at the volume of trade between Malawi and Zimbabwe. Right now, it's quite low. It's really, really low, and many people are concerned. And we've seen calls for the private sector and cross-border traders to also seize the trade opportunities that are being presented by leveraging on available preferential bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. What do you think needs to be done to increase this volume of trade? It's one thing to say you want to trade regionally. It's another thing to say you want to trade across the continent or beyond the continent. But if you're not even successful in trading with just your neighbors beside you, it doesn't lend itself to many people believing you'll be successful trading further away. So what can we do to increase the volume of trade between Malawi and Zimbabwe?
For Zimbabwe, there's need for standardization in the mining industry that would help that will help Malawian investors to be able to key into that sector properly. And for Malawi, particularly, its major exports is in the agricultural sector, which is something Zimbabwe relies heavily on because it has to augment for its food security by importation. And therefore, there's need for Malawi to improve its agricultural sector in such a way that Zimbabwe can make a better trading arrangement with them and improve the business, the level of business between both countries.
All right, let's follow up on that agricultural conversation there. Many countries try to protect their agricultural sectors. There's oftentimes subsidies and there are taxes and duties on goods, agricultural goods coming in from out of the country so that they can protect their sectors. What do you see happening with this? Because you're talking about the trade between Malawi and Zimbabwe, the agricultural trade, but we need to also be careful so that both countries can also allow their agricultural sectors to also develop. What do you think will happen there?
Yeah, so in areas where both countries can have crops that they can exchange for example, there will be no need to compete in those areas, and therefore know that there will be no surplus where Zimbabwean farmers, for example, will grow products and market forces will affect it and the products will crash. Instead of that, the ready market will be in Malawi, and that of Malawi will be sold in Zimbabwe. So they can have it both ways, and without having to impact negatively on the local farming communities in both countries.
All right. So this is interesting for me, given that the two countries are both members of COMESA and SADC, which also means that traders from both states can actually export and import goods duty-free and quota-free from each other. Do you actually think there was really a need to revise the 1995 agreement, given that they are already members of two regional bodies who have similar sorts of agreements in place in terms of trade and, of course, bilateral agreements? Was there really a need to revise the 1995 version that they had?
I do not see any need to revive it because most of the issues that would have been that were identified in 1995 have been expanded in the SADC and COMESA agreement. However, because what they had in 1995 was more like a foundation, it feels like something they can walk back to. It's like walking back to be able to move forward. In any case, until the implementations of these agreements start, we may not be able to see the fine details of why these agreements had to be reconsidered.
When you look at the bilateral agreements that have been signed, not just Burundi and DRC, not just Malawi and Zimbabwe, but we're seeing a number of those happening across board as it is. We're seeing regional bodies, regional economic groups also stepping in to, I guess, maybe renegotiate the terms of their agreements, especially in light of COVID-19. Where do you put the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement in the midst of all of this? We're all supposed to be one large market, but we're still seeing individual deals being signed between parties. Just last year, for the most part, we saw the UK also reaching out to individual countries, also signing bilateral agreements with African countries as it is working to exit the European Union. So when you look at all of that, you put the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreements into the conversation, what do you think you get?
Yeah, so the Continental Agreement after is a continent-wide agreement, and these are some of the complexities when you enter into agreements where the partners are multi-partners. There are many partners involved, and therefore it may not be able to run as smoothly as agreements between two countries. So where two countries are able to identify areas of interest, areas of mutual understanding, and areas of mutual investment and all of that, it is fine. To me, I'll believe that as these countries are able to enter into agreement, it boosts the chances for the successes of AFTA itself. AFTA will take shape with time. However, when you have two states or two countries who have identified areas they can partner in ways that does not contravene the fine details of the AFTA agreement, then it is fine to go on with it. The more trade we are able to run in Africa, the better, because if you look at the volume of trade between African countries, it is on the low compared to the amount of trade between Africa and other countries in the continent, especially Europe and America.
All right, so now what is left is, of course, implementation and then to see how these agreements actually pan out. Abdulateef Ahmed, researcher for us here at New Central, thank you for joining me on Business Edge.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So we will be watching to see how all of this plans out, particularly with Malawi and Zimbabwe. They have an agreement from 1995, also have an agreement from 2006 with 9-year validity. So it's not that any of these are new, but in the 21st century, with an Africa that has signed the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, how do these bilateral agreements between countries stack up? And that's something we'll be keeping our eye on. Another thing we keep our eye on are a few developing stories. So after this quick timeout, we're going to give you NC4 to watch. Stay with us. Wrapping things up, here are a few stories we're keeping our eyes on to see how they develop. And we start with the African Development Bank, which has said that its board of directors has approved a loan of $50 million for First City Monument Bank to channel to Nigerian enterprises and women-empowered businesses in the agribusiness, manufacturing, healthcare, and renewable energy sectors. In addition, the bank will provide a technical assistance grant of $200,000 through its Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa initiative, which is supported by the Women Entrepreneurship Finance Initiative. Second on the list, the board of directors of the African Development Bank, they've been quite busy and they've approved a grant of 60 million euros to Tunisia now to support economic recovery and social inclusion. The main objective of the program is to support economic recovery by improving the investment climate, preserving employment, and promoting social inclusion. South Africa's Mines and Energy Ministry has urged people not to panic, buy, and hoard fuel after the country's biggest refinery in Durban temporarily shut down and the movement of petroleum products was disrupted by unrest. In a statement, the ministry said government is working to secure the movement of all petroleum products. The ministry has issued regulations prohibiting the sale of petrol and diesel into containers. And finally, Tanzanian authorities have imposed a ban on logging in the East African nation's Kilimanjaro National Park to protect Africa's highest mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro. In a statement, the Ministry for Natural Resources and Tourism said residents living along the foot of the mountain invade parts of the national park that were created to protect the mountain and cut down the trees. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining us. You can head to YouTube. You can download our mobile app, which is available to you on App Store and Play Store. And of course, take us with you wherever you go. I'm back at 11 a.m. West African time tomorrow, Friday, for more business, economic, and financial news from the continent. I'm Tolu Lokwe Adelaru Balogun. Do have a good day.